So pleased to be joined by Luke Entwistle, football writer in France, based in Nice. His work has appeared in The Guardian. And if we're going to get a pulse on what it's like for Canadian football now in a country in one of the top five leagues where it is growing rapidly in terms of recognition, then we're talking to the right person. Luke, overall, what has been kind of the feeling about the growing presence of Canadian football, particularly, I mean, there's been a long presence of women's football when you take a look at the Canadians who played for Lyon. But in men's football now, how have you seen the profile of Canadian footballers rise over the last few months?
I mean, of course, what you're looking at initially is the arrival of Jonathan David, who, unlike some of the other recruits, haven't come from Canada or from the MLS, but he was really the big signing when he made the very short trip across the border from Belgium and joined Lille. And he kind of put Canada, I suppose, on the footballing map here in France. And he's continued to be, perform very, very well. And what you've seen is a more recent explosion, as you maybe referenced there, with TAKEOVER, with Ismael Kone, with Moise Bombito. All of these are players that really people here didn't know so much about, and they're still kind of discovering these new profiles as they come. But it's really put Canada on the map, whereas it was never really perceived, I'd say, as a very, as a footballing country, I'd say, prior to even 2-3 years ago. But I think it's more in line with a more general shift and a bigger focus on football in Canada. It's seen other profiles throughout Europe as well. Alphonso Davies is the notable other player who doesn't obviously feature in France to point out. But I think it's very much in line with a country that is growing into the footballing world, I suppose. And that's reflected in Europe's top five divisions, and especially in France now with 3-4 players who are around in and around the national team featuring clubs over here.
Let's pay particular attention to Jonathan David and explain how his reputation has grown at Lille, because he's won a title, and if you look at his game to goal average, he almost averages about a goal every other game. What has he meant to the overall history of that club? Because this is a club that obviously produced Eden Hazard, and before Jonathan David came, had a title run with Hazard in the early 2000s. But what has he been able to do, and how has his notoriety grown, particularly with Lille? What does he mean to that club now?
So, I mean, as you referenced, he was part of that historic league win just a few years ago. It was a strange season, that one. It was a very COVID-y kind of season. Not many people around in the stadiums to obviously experience that. But he was central to that success. And he's been central really to all of the success they've had since. I mean, under him and, other players too, you're looking even very recently at players like Eden Jagrova. But when you're looking at Jonathan David, you're looking at a prolific goal scorer whose goals have helped Lille into the Champions League, helped them beat Real Madrid, helped them beat the likes of Atletico Madrid, helped them draw against Juventus in midweek as well. I mean, those three results alone, all of which have come this season, he's played a key, very pivotal role in. And those are three results, I'd say, that will forever mark the history of that football club. Everyone will remember when they beat Real Madrid. Everyone will remember when they went to Madrid a few weeks later and got a result against Atletico too. So really, he scored some club defining goals, I'd say, in these recent months. His reputation is he's got a very strong reputation here. He's always scored consistently, but he is a bit of a purple patch player, and it's a bit of a weird story with him sometimes, because at the end of every season, or even in the approach to the January transfer window here as well, what you always find is his name is touted here, there, everywhere. Where's he going? He's going to the Premier League. He's going to the Bundesliga. He's always expected to leave and never actually leaves. So it's funny. He really puts himself on the market. It feels as though the club put him on the market. Clubs say, we're ready to cash in on this player this year. And every year, the season starts, Jonathan David's there. He's very happy to be there. And he's always said that. He's always said, if something comes up and the club want me to go, I'll go. But, those opportunities haven't arisen. And he's been very, very happy to be there, to continue to be the main man as he still is today. Obviously, a bit of a situation coming up in the coming months as his contract actually expires at the end of the season. So a decision will have to be made one way or the other. Either he extends in January, or he will obviously be free to talk about a free transfer with any of the clubs. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. I think the expectation currently in France is that he won't continue with Lille, but if he does leave this summer, then he'll leave having made a huge mark on the history of this football club.
Yeah, and purple patch, I think, is the best way to describe it, because I mean, at the beginning of last season, for David, he didn't have a great run of form. Was able to pick it up towards the end of last season, push Lille into Europe, as you explained. But is there kind of a feeling now, and do you get the sense that there is more attention on where he's going to go, irrespective if it's going to be a free transfer in January and he can sign a pre-contract, or if he stays? Is there so much more attention because of the form that he's been in the last few weeks?
I think that lots of the talk is about, are there talks about a contract renewal, and why aren't there kind of talks about a contract renewal? I think there are more questions about that rather than questions about where exactly is he going to go. I know he's linked with, notably actually with Chelsea in the summer. He's been linked also heavily with a move to La Liga as well. But there is an attention to that situation because, of course, this is a player that was reportedly worth around 50 million euros at one point, maybe even 60 million euros. And for a club like Lille, who granted are in a much more stable financial situation now than they were, say, 3 or 4 years ago, that is a significant payday if they can get some money for him. So I think there's a lot of attention on those contract talks. There may be even a solution of a 1 year extension, which is quite a common thing, I'd say, in France in particular, where you give them an extra year. It means that you're not missing out on money, and you can maybe come to an agreement that if an offer comes in the summer, we'll let you go, even if it's on a slightly cheaper deal. But it's definitely one to look out for, I'd say, in the next 2 months, because, of course, that pre-contract agreement can be signed from the 1st of January. Lille will want to probably avoid a situation of losing on a free, even though the feeling around France, I'd say, is one of kind of resignation that he will potentially leave, and potentially leave for nothing, which would be a shame for Lille, given his market value, as it were.
Jonathan David is a known commodity, and his future is something that is bringing a lot of interest. Moise Bombito coming in, does it feel like it was unexpected to see? From our perspective, he was playing in American Community College just a few short years ago. Was he seen as a project, or was there inkling that you were hearing from Nice and those around the club that when he came in, that they thought that they might have someone special there?
I think the latter. I'd say that Nice have gone for a couple of interesting profiles in defence. So there's been a lot of change at Nice over the summer, behind the scenes, on the pitch too. You've seen Francesco Farioli leave the manager to join Ajax. You've seen the sporting director go off to join Roma. So what they've done is they've constructed completely behind the scenes, with Francaise coming in from Lens, and you've got Florian Maurice coming in from Rennes. So there's a lot of change behind the scene. But one of the big changes is that Francaise plays with the back three. So that's three centre-backs that you're going to need to find. All the while, Jean-Claire Todibo, who's been the rock at the back for the last 2-3 years, he's leaving. He joins West Ham. So I think that anyone who came in, obviously that was Bombito, there's also Mohamed Abdelmonem as well from Egypt. Anyone coming in was seen as someone who had to be able to start, and someone who, as you've seen with Bombito in particular, he's been an ever-present. That's already 11 appearances that he's made in all competitions since his arrival. So I think that because of the lack of centre-backs when Francaise arrived as manager, everyone was looking at the players that were arriving in that position saying, surely these all have to be starters, because there needed to be a big and quite rapid rebuild of that back line after, of course, Todibo left to join West Ham. So I think the expectation was always that he would play. Maybe a little bit surprised about his level and how well he's performed and how quickly he's slotted in. But he I think the expectation was he'd be a prominent figure, and that's exactly what's come to pass.
And how have you seen him grow? Because for those who don't understand it, to enter one of Europe's top 5 leagues is not an easy proposition, especially for someone coming from Major League Soccer, with all due respect to that North American league. But for someone like Moise Bombito, who has seen himself grow into that center back position and really a leadership position for Canada, to see that growth continue, what's the best way to describe? Would you say it's an exceptional case or surprising? What would be the best way to describe the way that he's just integrated himself? I don't want to say seamlessly, but enough to a point that he's become so reliable so quickly.
So I think a lot of credit has to be paid to Nice in the first instance, because I think that they've seen his profile and seen that his physical attributes really fit in with Ligue 1. So Ligue 1 is a division that is talked about as being very physical. As a centre-back, you need to be tall, but you also have to be very quick. And I'd say that Bombito very much ticks those 2 boxes. So I think that they've looked at physical attributes. I think they've probably spoken to people across the Atlantic as well, and have got very good feedback, because as you referenced, this is a guy who by the age of 19 wasn't even a professional footballer. So you're talking about a late bloomer here, but he's someone who has clearly burst onto the scene and impressed everyone to the extent that he's had this meteoric rise, with the Canada national team as well, and now coming into Europe. So yeah, I'd say that I'd say that he's someone who's certainly impressed very, very quickly, and who's really grown into this Nice backline, which hasn't been easy, I would say, because this back three, there's been lots of injuries. There's been players coming in, there's been players coming out for various different reasons, suspensions, injuries, lack of form as well. But Bombito's been kind of this ever present, and he's very much made one of those three spots. It's very much his whilst things are going on around him. He is very much the ever present at the center of that defense.
So now Jonathan David this weekend will go up against Moise Bombito as someone who watches Ligue 1 as closely as you do. How do you grade this matchup? What should fans be looking for?
I think it's quite a fascinating matchup. It's a different proposition, but if you look a few weeks back when he's played PSG, he actually moved Bombito out of the central position and he put him onto the right, which was a really interesting move. And we asked him in post match, what was behind that decision. He said, "Well, look, I look at Bombito's profile and his capabilities, and I think he's much more suited to keeping Bradley Barcola touted as maybe the best player currently in Ligue 1, certainly the most exciting player on the ball to watch in Ligue 1. And he says, look, I think that he's more well equipped than anyone else in our team to keep this guy quiet. And that's exactly what he did throughout the match. We barely saw any of Barcola throughout that match. David is a slightly different proposition, not as fast, plays more centrally, also has this capacity to hold the ball up and bring others into play. The big danger man is Jagrover, actually, on the opposite side, on the right, so he won't have that necessarily to contend with. So I do see Bombito likely staying in the centre rather than being moved out wide as he was against PSG, and being put in on a man marking position with Jonathan David, which I think will be quite interesting to watch from a Canada perspective to see what that matchup looks like. But I think that Bombito, he's got the beating of him, I'd say, in the air. I think he's also a quicker player than Jonathan David. I mean, Bombito is someone who did start life as a striker, just didn't really have the sang-froid, as they say, in front of goal to take those chances. But I see it as a very interesting physical matchup, and a tactical matchup too, with two different systems coming into play there. I do kind of see Bombito, if I'm going out on a limb, I do see Bombito winning that battle, but let's see how it goes come Sunday.
How have the fans taken to him, especially being someone who, as you say, is a late bloomer? How have the Nice supporters taken to him, and what you know the club, you're around the club, you're around the city. How is he taken to being in Nice as well?
So I think the fans have taken to him very, very nicely indeed, actually. They don't make chants for every player, but I have seen people talking about making a chant for Bombito, and there's a couple in the works that kind of come up on the Twitter feeds and people are discussing. So, they've definitely taken to him very well. I think they quite like him because he's also very aggressive in his duels, very combative. Really one of those players that when he puts on the shirt, he really plays for it. And he really fights for every duel, fights for every ball. And the fans here really, really appreciate that style of player. So yeah, they've taken to him very well. I think he's settled in quite nicely by the looks of things, Bombito. I mean, he's got Ismael Kone just down the coast as well, at Marseille, not too far away. He's quite open, when he first arrived, saying, I don't know too much about this city. I don't think his family have moved over with him either. So I think that all the signs have been pretty positive that he's well settled here on his own. And I think, if you're not well settled, in terms of integration, in terms of living a new life here in France, I think that shows on the pitch. And I think that the performances on the pitch, which have been overwhelmingly positive, are also a reflection of what's going on off the pitch for him, which all seems to be going swimmingly.
Switching gears, and you mentioned Ismael Kone. I tried to articulate to Canadians the passion that is Marseille football, and the passion that is the history of that club and some of the great players who have gone to that club, but the demands of that city and the demands of that club. Can you kind of articulate what Derek Cornelius and Ismael Kone were being introduced to when they moved to the South Coast?
Hard to articulate, hard to find words for it. As you say, you can try to, but it's hard to. I mean, it's known more colloquially now, the velodrome, as the volcano, le volcan, as they call it. The noise, I've been there on a couple of occasions. It's not too far down the coast here from Nice, but the noise in that place is something else. And if you're not at the right level, it's a place that can absolutely eat you up. Honestly, I mean, Elie Wahi, French youth international, he joins over the summer, for example, puts in a bit of a stinker of an opening performance, misses a few chances. this is the kids, as a young lad, youth international. He gets absolutely pelted by the fan base, booed off the pitch on his home debut for his new club. So this is the kind of club that we're talking about. The expectations are so high, and if you fall short of them, you're known about it very vocally and very quickly as well. So it's an interesting environment. There's a fervor throughout the city that I've never experienced elsewhere. You walk through the city on a match day. You won't see exclusively Marseille shirts, but you can't walk down or go around a corner without seeing a few people in a Marseille shirt. They're there hours before the game, absolutely hours before the game, lighting flares, chanting on the steps in front of the velodrome. A match really, it's not 90 minutes in Marseille. It's a whole day that it feels as though it takes up there. So it's a really difficult sink or swim environment for new players coming into that club. I think there's a little bit of time afforded to, for example, Kone and Cornelius this year because, well, it's a bit of a rebuild job going on. They brought in a new manager. They brought in a new sporting director midway through last season amid a pretty awful crisis. And all the talk around the club is give this time. And De Zerbi keeps saying, this club has just been born. This team has just been born. Everyone's coming from different championships. Give us time. Give us time. You don't get too much time at Marseille, but you're afforded a little bit more time this year. Ismael Kone, he arrived with that. I know a bit of an injury, and he's kind of coming up to speed, trying to find the right place for him in this midfield. He's been trialed as number 10. I'm not sure if that's 100% his game. But yeah, it's been an introduction that is maybe they've been afforded a little bit more leeway than some of their predecessors. Let's put it that way.
And to that point about how he's being used right now, so much attention was put on Ismael Kone and frankly Derek Cornelius. I was there in Bordeaux when they were in France's going away game before the Euros, and it looked like Kone could fit in French soccer with the speed and the technical elements of it. He's injured both ankles over the course of the last few months, in his first few months at Marseille. But how has he gotten on so far? I mean, this is another one like Bombito, who he's a little younger, coming right from Major League Soccer, or coming from Watford, but through the Major League Soccer path. How has he taken to being in France, especially with dealing with injuries and a club with the expectations like Marseille?
Yeah, so not as seamless, I would say, as Moise Bombito at Nice. I think the issue with him has been the inconsistency at Marseille on a collective level, and the chopping and changing that we've seen from De Zerbi because he's not fully settled on his personnel. He's not fully even settled, it seems, really on his formation as well, and exactly how all of these bits kind of fit together. So I think what you've seen from Kone, you've seen flashes of technical brilliance. But you're maybe not seeing all of what he's got to offer. He's not helped as well by so many other recruits in the midfield sector. I'm thinking of Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, who came in from Tottenham, for example. Even more recently, you've got Adrien Rabiot coming in on a free transfer. France international, he's someone who's always going to play every single game. So I think finding his spot and finding the right balance and finding the automatisms, which is so important in the midfield with these new elements, as I say, this club very much being born, as De Zerbi keeps putting it, I think is quite difficult for him. De Zerbi rates him highly, speaks very well of him, clearly sees the potential there. He's a young player. He's one of the younger midfielders, so he's one that they're trying to bed in. The injuries haven't helped, but I think that over the course of the season, we'll see him featuring more prominently and being hopefully more effective as well. But yeah, unlike Bombito, at least it's definitely been a bit of a ruder introduction to French football, even though there's not kind of a standout poor performance here or there, as there maybe was with Bombito in his first game when he got, second game when he got that red card. That was obviously a standout low point. With Kone, it's fewer low points, but certainly, not really too many high points just yet, but very early days for him. And he's probably himself working back fitness as well.
And to end on this, take us through, if you're getting a sense, if those around French football are starting to understand how important Ligue 1 is going to be to overall Canadian football with the men's team, but also when you take a look at the influence that Larry Tannenbaum's Kilmer Sports Group has on a club like Saint-Etienne, which is a historic club when you look at the history of French football. I mean, Michel Platini started there, first French team to get to 10 titles, obviously coming back. They have been relegated to Ligue 2. But do people in France get a sense of the influence that country and its league is having now on Canadian football?
I don't think quite yet. It's early days, and I think that there's been lots of topics, let's say, in French football these past few months with Mbappe leaving, with the presidential elections at the LFP, for example. There's been lots of big topics, big subjects. But as you rightly say, you draw the lines and you look at the personnel arriving in French football, be it on the pitch or behind the scenes, as it is with the Kilmer Sports Group. And there will be an added influence, and there will be a connection there drawn over the coming months and coming years. I mean, if Kilmer are successful there, then they'll become a very prominent figure in French football. Because, as you rightly say, Saint-Etienne, huge club. For context, this is a serial winner historically in the 21st century. It's still a club that has been featured prominently in Europe as well. A recent decline. They've just had 2 years in France's second division. Recently come back up. They're very much rebuilding. They're still a work in progress. Maybe not keeping with their manager too much longer. It feels as though he's walking a bit of a tightrope and has done every single match week, and he keeps kind of saving himself with one performance. But Kilmer will probably have a decision to make there as well. But if they're successful, and it seems like they are putting in the money to be successful. They made some decent signings despite the huge financial problems currently in French football. If they can take them to the top, they'll be, make a huge splash in French football because just of how huge Saint-Etienne have been and maybe will be again in French football.
And when you take a look at the path that Saint-Etienne could have, when also include Theo Bair in that conversation, Derek Cornelius, Ismael, Kone, Moise, Bombito, and Jonathan David, it is an exciting rest of the season with the amount of Canadian influence and talent there is in Liga. So, Luke, I hope we get to do this again. Thanks very much for this.
Thank you very much.